Major Anya Sharma stepped off the transport into the teeth of a wind that tasted of grit and altitude. FOB Nightingale was less a base and more a collection of hardened shelters clinging to a mountainside, a lonely outpost in a world of rock and sky. The air was thin, burning her lungs with its cold purity. Around her, soldiers barely out of their teens, sinewy and sun-cured, moved with the jittery energy of youth in a dangerous place. They glanced at her, their eyes taking in the silver oak leaf on her collar, her age lines, and the crisp, clean uniform of a rear echelon officer. Their gazes slid right off. She was 43 years old, assigned to logistics, and in their world, she was already invisible. A piece of the bureaucracy that fed them and armed them but did not fight with them. Her presence was an anomaly, a desk job at the sharp end of the spear. The base commander, Colonel Marcus Thorne, was said to be a man who valued muscle and momentum above all else. Sharma knew her file, with its sterile listing of logistical command and resource management, would have landed on his desk like a brick of inert paperwork. She was a problem to be managed, not an asset to be deployed. From the edge of the landing pad, she could see the base's primary training ground, a sprawling obstacle course and a modular structure they called the kill house. Even from a distance, she could hear the rhythmic shouting of an instructor, a sound that was as familiar to her as her own breathing. She watched a fire team of 4 young soldiers burst from the entrance of the house, their movements clumsy, adrenaline-fueled. The instructor, a burly master sergeant with a voice like grinding stones, tore into them, his critique brutal and precise. Sharma's eyes, however, weren't on the trainees. They were on the structure itself. She noted the angles of the walls, the placement of the simulated doorways, the potential fields of fire. She saw the inefficient paths the soldiers took, the seconds they wasted on indecision. She saw the patterns. A younger soldier, a private with the name Ortega stitched over his pocket, was tasked with taking her bags to her quarters. He was nervous, shuffling his feet. "This way, ma'am," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. He likely expected a complaint about the Spartan conditions, the dust, the sheer remoteness of it all. Sharma simply nodded, her gaze still fixed on the kill house. "Who runs the training there?" she asked, her voice calm and even, cutting through the wind. Ortega seemed surprised by the question. "That's Master Sergeant Henderson, ma'am. Gunner. He's tough. Holds the course record himself. 1 minute, 24 seconds. No one's come close." Sharma filed the information away. 1:24. She watched Henderson demonstrate a room-clearing technique for the failing recruits. His movements were powerful, aggressive, and confident. They were also, she noted, deeply predictable. He relied on speed and overwhelming force, a valid tactic but not the only one. There were other ways, quieter ways. As she turned to follow the private, her duffel bag slung over her own shoulder, she felt the familiar, quiet hum under her skin. The analytic part of her brain, the part that saw the world as a series of problems to be solved, was already awake and taking notes. The soldiers saw a middle-aged paper pusher. She saw a puzzle waiting for a solution. Colonel Marcus Thorne looked at the file on his desk for the 3rd time, as if staring at it would change the words. "Major Anya Sharma. Logistics," he said the word, logistics, as if it were a communicable disease. He was a man carved from the same rock as the mountains surrounding them, a commander who believed battles were won by the strength of his soldiers' legs and the accuracy of their aim. He understood infantry, armor, and air support. He did not understand how a 43-year-old major with a recent career history in supply chain optimization was supposed to contribute to his mission here at the ragged edge of the world. She sat in the chair opposite him, perfectly still. Her posture was erect but not rigid, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She had said nothing beyond the initial reporting courtesies. The silence was hers, not his, and it unnerved him. "Major," he began, leaning forward, his voice a low growl that usually made junior officers shrink. "This is a forward operating base, a hard post. We have a high operational tempo. Every billet here is critical. I need trigger pullers, scouts, medics. What I don't need is more brass from headquarters." The insult was plain, a direct challenge to her presence. Sharma didn't flinch. Her expression remained neutral, her dark eyes meeting his without defiance or submission. I understand, Colonel. My orders are to streamline the resupply chain for Operation Vigilant Summit. The current system is showing a 17% loss rate on sensitive equipment between Kandahar and here. She spoke in facts, not apologies. Her directness was jarring. Thorne had expected excuses or justifications. Instead, he got data. It only irritated him more. I don't care about your percentages, Major. I care about the fact that you're taking up a housing unit and a ration slot that could go to a combat engineer. Your streamlining can be done from a comfortable chair 1,000 miles away. With respect, Colonel, she replied, her tone unwavering. You can't understand the terrain-specific logistical challenges without being on the ground. The satellite data doesn't show the washouts on the North Pass or the unreliability of local transport assets. That's why I'm here. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. He saw the faint scars on her knuckles, the disciplined economy of her every minor movement. There was something about her that didn't fit the profile of a career logistics officer. A stillness, a coiled tension beneath the calm facade. But her file was thin, almost suspiciously so. A solid, unremarkable career in staff positions for the last decade. Before that, the records were vague, with a long, classified period simply marked detached duty. He dismissed it as bureaucratic redaction. Your predecessor was a captain half your age who spent most of his time in the gym, Thorne said, changing tactics. The altitude here is unforgiving. The physical standards are not waived for staff. It was another jab, a clear reference to her age and gender. He was testing her, trying to find a crack. Anya Sharma simply nodded. I'm aware of the physical requirements, sir. I will meet them. See that you do, Thorne said, his tone a clear dismissal. He gestured toward the door. Find the supply depot. Get acquainted with your containers and your manifests. Stay out of the way of the real work we're doing here. As she stood, gave a crisp nod, and walked out. Thorne felt a lingering sense of dissatisfaction. He had tried to put her in her place, to establish the hierarchy and her irrelevance within it. But he had the distinct impression that he had failed. Her quiet dignity was a form of armor he hadn't been able to penetrate. He was left alone in his office, the silence she had brought with her now feeling heavy and accusatory. He picked up her file again, staring at the name. Major Anya Sharma. She was a stone dropped into his pond, and he had no idea how deep she would sink. In the days that followed, Sharma became a ghost in the machinery of the base. She did exactly as the colonel had ordered. She reported to the cavernous, wind-blasted supply depot each morning before sunrise and left long after sunset. The depot was a chaotic mess of containers, crates, and pallets, managed by a perpetually overwhelmed sergeant and a handful of disillusioned specialists. The manifests were a fantasy, bearing little resemblance to the actual contents of the shipping containers. Sensitive optics were stored next to leaking barrels of hydraulic fluid. Ammunition pallets were left exposed to the elements. It was the 17% loss rate made manifest. Sharma didn't complain. She didn't issue a flurry of new orders. She began to work. She started with a single container, a clipboard, and a pen. She worked methodically, inventorying every item, cross-referencing it with the shipping orders, and reorganizing the contents with a spatial efficiency that bordered on art. The depot staff watched her with detached amusement at first. They saw a major doing a private's work, and it confirmed their belief that she was out of her element, a desk jockey trying to look busy. But the amusement slowly faded as the days wore on. The corner of the depot where she worked transformed. Chaos became order. Stacks of unlabeled boxes were replaced by neat rows of inventoried crates, each marked with clear, concise labels detailing contents, date of arrival, and destination platoon. She worked through sandstorms and the biting afternoon cold, never slowing her pace. She spoke little, but when she did, it was to ask a precise question. Where is the manifest for Container 7B? The one that arrived on the 14th inch, or this batch of batteries has a shelf life that expired 2 months ago. Who signed for them? Her questions were not accusations. They were surgical inquiries that uncovered layers of neglect and incompetence. But her observation was not limited to the depot. In her few off hours, she walked the perimeter of the base. She studied the interlocking fields of fire from the guard towers. She memorized the topographical maps in the command tent, her eyes tracing the contour lines of the surrounding peaks and valleys, her mind calculating distances, gradients, and potential avenues of approach and escape. And she watched the men. She learned the rhythms of the base, the shift changes, the moments of laxity, the undercurrents of fear and bravado. Most often, she found herself drawn back to the kill house. She would stand at a respectful distance, a mug of steaming coffee in her hands, and watch Master Sergeant Henderson run his squads. Henderson was a force of nature. He was loud, profane, and utterly dedicated to his craft. He pushed his men to their limits and beyond. Sharma saw his value. She also saw his blind spots. His training philosophy was built on a foundation of aggression. Speed, violence of action, and momentum, he would roar. The enemy is a nail. You are the hammer. His soldiers learned to be hammers. But hammers, Sharma knew, were not always the right tool. Sometimes you needed a scalpel. She watched Henderson run the course himself to set a benchmark for his men. He moved with the brutal grace of a heavyweight boxer. He kicked open doors, sprayed targets with controlled bursts, and navigated the maze with practiced familiarity. His time of 124 was impressive, a testament to his power and conditioning. But Sharma saw the wasted motion, the slight overpenetration into rooms that exposed him for a fraction of a second, the wide, arcing turns around corners, the half-second he took to reacquire his sights after a sprint. These were tiny flaws, invisible to the cheering soldiers, but to her, they were glaring inefficiencies. She wasn't judging him. She was analyzing. She was learning the problem. Private Ortega, the young soldier from her first day, sometimes saw her watching. He was the only one who seemed to notice the intensity of her focus. He saw that she wasn't just observing. She was dissecting. One afternoon, he mustered the courage to approach her. "Learning some tricks, ma'am?" he asked, trying for a casual tone. Sharma turned her gaze from the course to him. For a moment, he felt as if she were seeing every mistake he'd ever made on the range. Then her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Every moment is an opportunity to learn. Private," she said, her voice quiet. She then turned her attention back to the kill house, where Henderson was screaming about the importance of a single second. The pressure began not with a missile or an ambush, but with the bark of Master Sergeant Gunner Henderson's voice. It was record day at the kill house, a monthly event Henderson had created to foster competition and keep his soldiers sharp. The air was thick with testosterone and the smell of cordite from the training rounds. A crowd of off-duty soldiers had gathered, forming a loose circle around the entrance to the course, their cheers and jeers echoing off the steel walls. Henderson stood with a stopwatch in his hand and a scowl on his face, a drill master in his element. "Come on, ladies, move it!" he bellowed as a team from Alpha Company stumbled out, their time a full 30 seconds slower than the standing record. "My grandmother could clear that house faster, and she's dead." The soldiers laughed, a familiar ritual of abuse and motivation. Henderson had already run his best men through, and none had come close to his personal best of 124. He thrived on this, on being the apex predator of his own little kingdom. He was about to run the course himself, to set the goddamn standard, as he put it, when he spotted Major Sharma. She was standing near the edge of the crowd, a little apart from everyone else, holding her usual mug of coffee. She was just watching, her face impassive. For Henderson, her quiet presence was a constant, low-grade irritant. The logistics major who spent her days stacking boxes but always seemed to be observing his domain. He saw her as an auditor, a creature from the world of paperwork and regulations, passing silent judgment on his world of sweat and action. Today his patience was gone. "Major!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd went quiet, all eyes turning to Sharma. "This isn't a spectator sport. The supply depot is that way. He pointed with a thumb the size of a sausage toward the other side of the base. A few of the younger soldiers snickered. It was a blatant public dismissal. He was using his authority on the training ground to put an officer in her place. A risky but calculated move. He expected her to flush with embarrassment, to offer a quiet apology and retreat. Sharma did not move. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes meeting his over the rim of the mug. The entire base seemed to hold its breath. The wind whistled through the gaps in the buildings, the only sound. She lowered the mug slowly, her movements deliberate. "You're right, Master Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. It's not a spectator sport. The pressure was now squarely on her. Dozens of soldiers, from privates to senior NCOs, were watching. Henderson had challenged her in front of his men. Backing down would mean accepting the role he had assigned her. An irrelevant pencil pusher. Stepping forward meant entering his world, on his terms. She looked from Henderson's smug face to the dark, intimidating maw of the kill house entrance. She saw the challenge, but she also saw the opportunity she had been observing for weeks. The problem was laid out before her, complete with its arrogant, overconfident gatekeeper. She felt no anger, no fear. Only a calm, cold clarity. The pieces were all on the board. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Henderson crossed his thick arms, a smirk playing on his lips. He had her pinned. "Well," he prodded, "are you lost? Or are you just admiring the architecture?" The question hung in the air, a final goad. The pressure to act or to flee was immense. For anyone else, it would have been a moment of humiliation. For Anya Sharma, it was simply a decision point. Anya Sharma set her coffee mug down on a nearby ammunition can with a soft click. She looked at Henderson, then at the entrance to the kill house. "I'd like to run the course," she said. Her voice was not challenging or arrogant. It was a simple statement of fact. A wave of murmurs and stifled laughter rippled through the assembled soldiers. A major, a logistics officer in her 40s? Running Gunner Henderson's course? The idea was absurd. Henderson himself let out a short, incredulous bark of a laugh. "You want to run the course, ma'am? With all due respect, this isn't a tour. This is a live-fire simulation. It requires a specific skill set." "I'm aware," Sharma replied, her gaze steady. Henderson's smirk widened. He saw a chance not just to dismiss her, but to humiliate her, to create a cautionary tale for any other REMF who got too big for their britches. "All right, Major. Be my guest," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't want to deny you the chance to get some exercise. Ortega, get the Major a rifle and a helmet. And somebody get a medic." Just in case, Private Ortega scurried off, looking mortified. The soldiers' amusement grew. This was going to be better than watching the recruits fail. This was going to be comedy. Sharma ignored the whispers. She calmly unzipped her standard issue fleece jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it on top of her duffel bag, which she'd seemingly brought with her. Underneath, she wore a simple, form-fitting black athletic shirt. The soldiers who had only ever seen her in a baggy uniform jacket now saw the lean, corded muscles of her shoulders and arms. She was not bulky, but there was a density to her physique that spoke of years of relentless, functional conditioning. The snickering lessened. Ortega returned with a standard M4 training rifle and a helmet. Sharma took the weapon. Her hands moved over it with an economy of motion that was startling. She didn't just hold it. She absorbed it. She checked the magazine, tested the charging handle, and sighted down the barrel in a single, fluid sequence. It was the practiced intimacy of a master craftsman with a familiar tool. The remaining whispers died completely. Henderson's smirk faltered for a second. He had seen thousands of soldiers handle a rifle. He had never seen anyone do it quite like that. Sharma clipped the helmet on, adjusting the strap with a practiced tug. She stood at the entrance, her body relaxed, her focus absolute. She wasn't looking at the crowd or at Henderson. She was looking into the darkness of the first room. "Timer is on you, Master Sergeant," she said without turning. Henderson, recovering his composure, clicked the stopwatch. On your go, Major Sharma took one deep, centering breath, the cold air filling her lungs. Then she exhaled. Go, she said, her voice barely a whisper, and exploded into motion. She didn't run into the first room. She flowed. Instead of kicking the door, she slipped through the opening, low and fast, her weapon already tracking. 2 shots, a precise double tap to the first target. Pop pop. She didn't pause to admire her work. She was already moving to the next corner, not running but gliding in a controlled, predatory crouch. Her path was completely different from the one Henderson and his men took. She hugged the inside walls, minimizing her exposure. She sliced the pie at every corner, her rifle barrel seeming to anticipate the location of the next target. Pop pop. Another one down. The crowd was silent, mesmerized. They were watching something they didn't understand. It wasn't the brute force of a hammer. It was the lethal grace of a surgeon. She cleared the first floor in less than 30 seconds. At the stairs, instead of charging up them, she took them 2 at a time, her back to the wall, rifle covering the landing above. Pop pop. A target on the second floor landing fell. She reached the top and pirouetted into the final room, a larger space with 3 targets. She went to one knee, a stable firing platform. Pop pop. Pop pop. The 5th target. Then she pivoted, acquiring the final, most difficult target, partially obscured behind a simulated non-combatant. She didn't spray. She waited a fraction of a second, her breathing controlled, and fired a single, perfect shot. Pop. The round struck the target squarely in the headbox. Silence. She emerged from the exit, breathing steadily, not even winded. She walked back to the starting point, unclipped her helmet, and handed the rifle back to a dumbfounded Ortega. She looked at Henderson. His mouth was slightly agape, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was still holding the stopwatch, his thumb frozen over the button. Time, Master Sergeant? Sharma asked quietly. Henderson looked down at the watch as if seeing it for the first time. He swallowed hard. His voice was a strangled rasp. 1 minute, and 54 seconds. A gasp went through the crowd. No, that wasn't right. Felt much faster. No, Henderson corrected himself, his voice shaking slightly as he stared at the digital display. Not 1:54. 54. 54 seconds. 0.3 inches. Stunned. Absolute silence fell over the training ground. 54 seconds. 30 seconds faster than Henderson's own record. A record that had stood for 3 years and was considered unbeatable. Major Anya Sharma, the logistics officer, had not just beaten it. She had obliterated it. She simply picked up her fleece jacket, nodded once to the stupefied Master Sergeant, and walked back toward the supply depot, leaving a crater of shattered assumptions in her wake. The aftermath of Sharma's run was a seismic event that fractured the social landscape of FOB Nightingale. The story spread through the base like a grass fire, mutating with each telling. Some said she had cleared the course blindfolded. Others swore she had done it with a pistol. The truth was shocking enough. The quiet, middle-aged logistics major was, by a massive margin, the most lethally efficient person on the entire base. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The dismissive glances from the young infantry soldiers were replaced by looks of awe and intense curiosity. When she walked into the mess hall, conversations would dip, and eyes would follow her. The soldiers who had snickered at Henderson's taunt now avoided her gaze, their faces flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and respect. She had become a legend in the span of 54 seconds. Private Ortega became a minor celebrity by proxy. He was peppered with questions. What did she say before she went in? How did she handle the weapon? Is it true she wasn't even breathing hard? Ortega, who had seen it up close, could only shake his head. I don't know, man. It was like watching a movie. She just moved differently, like she was part of the weapon. Henderson took the humiliation hard. He became withdrawn and sullen. He stopped running the kill house drills for 2 days, a first since his arrival at the FOB. His authority, built on a foundation of being the best, had been demolished. He avoided Sharma completely. When they passed on the dusty pathways of the base, he would find something intensely interesting to study on the opposite side of the road. It wasn't just hatred in his eyes, though. It was confusion. He was a man who understood the world in terms of strength and power, and he had no category for what he had witnessed. Sharma's run was beyond his comprehension. For her part, Sharma acted as if nothing had happened. She was back in the supply depot the next morning, clipboard in hand, continuing her methodical inventory. She deflected the few brave questions that came her way with a quiet, non-committal smile. Her consistency was, in its own way, as unsettling as her performance on the course. She had revealed a glimpse of a terrifying capability and then had simply gone back to stacking boxes, leaving everyone else to grapple with the implications. Colonel Thorne heard the news within the hour. His first reaction was disbelief, followed by suspicion. He summoned Henderson to his office. The master sergeant stood before him, humbled and defeated. "Tell me what happened," Thorne commanded. Henderson recounted the events, his voice flat, devoid of its usual bluster. He didn't make excuses. He just stated the facts, ending with the impossible time. 54 seconds, he repeated, the number tasting like ash in his mouth. "I've run that course 1,000 times, sir. I don't see how it's physically possible." Thorne dismissed him and sat back in his chair, staring at the wall. A logistics officer, paper pusher. He had personally dismissed her as dead weight. Now, that same officer held the base's most coveted combat record. It didn't make sense. The discrepancy between her file and her abilities was a chasm. He pulled up her record on his terminal again. Logistics, staff college, resource management. Then that 10-year black hole. Detached duty, he had assumed. It was some forgotten staff assignment. Now, it seemed like a deliberate void, a curtain drawn over something significant. His skepticism about her value began to curdle into a different kind of curiosity. Who was Major Anya Sharma? The kill house was a game, a simulation. Proved she had skills, yes, but Thorne was a man who dealt in real-world results. He was intrigued, but not convinced. She was still a problem, but now a far more interesting one. He decided to watch her. The base had shifted around her, but she remained its calm, unchanging center. The whispers and the stares didn't seem to affect her. She continued her work, her focus absolute. The respect she had earned was laced with fear and mystery. She was no longer invisible. She was an enigma. The true test came a week later, not in the simulated confines of the kill house, but in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Hindu Kush. An RQ-27 Sparrowhawk, one of the military's most advanced reconnaissance drones, went down. It wasn't shot down. A sudden, violent rotor wash from a passing gunship in a narrow canyon had sent it into an uncontrollable spin. It had crashed deep in the Alton Gorge, a jagged scar of rock and ice 10 miles inside officially designated hostile territory. The panic in the command tent was immediate and acute. The Sparrowhawk wasn't just a drone. It was carrying a new generation of encrypted data link hardware and a solid-state memory module containing high-resolution imagery of insurgent networks across 3 provinces. If that module fell into enemy hands, the intelligence loss would be catastrophic. Colonel Thorne stood over a massive holographic map of the region, his face a grim mask. "What are our options?" he snapped. The air crackled with tension. His operations officer, a flustered captain, pointed to a route. "Sir, we can insert a quick reaction force by helicopter at this LZ, 3 clicks south of the gorge. They'd have to fight their way in. Estimated time to reach the crash site, 6 hours, best case. Heavy contact expected," Thorne swore under his breath. 6 hours was an eternity. The enemy monitored all comms channels. They would know a drone was down and would be racing for it. A second officer proposed an airborne insertion. "We could do a halo jump at night, sir." A small team of rangers, negative. Thorne shot back. "The winds in that gorge are a nightmare. I'd be throwing them to their deaths. The drone's emergency beacon is active. The enemy is already on their way. We don't have hours. We have minutes." The officers threw out more ideas. Complex, loud, and risky plans involving airstrikes and diversionary forces. Each one was too slow, too visible. They were trying to solve the problem with a hammer, but the situation required a scalpel. Major Sharma was in the tent. She had been summoned because the Sparrowhawk was a high-value logistical asset, and its loss had to be logged. She stood at the back, silent, listening to the frantic planning. She watched the frantic gestures at the map, the rising panic in the officers' voices. Then she moved. She walked quietly to the edge of the holographic table. The other officers fell silent, surprised by her forwardness. She raised a hand and pointed to a section of the map that everyone had ignored. It was a sheer, almost vertical cliff face that formed the northern wall of the gorge. "There," she said. Her voice was calm, cutting through the tense atmosphere. The operations captain squinted at the map. "Ma'am, that's a sheer rock wall. The topographical survey marks it as a Class 5 technical climb. It's over 2,000 feet of vertical rock. It's impassable, not impassable." Sharma corrected him gently. "Difficult. It's a high-angle traverse route. It avoids the valley floor completely. No patrols, direct line to the crash site. From the summit, it's a 600-foot rappel directly to the drone's location." Thorne stared at the route she had indicated. It was audacious, insane. It was also brilliant. A route no conventional military force would ever consider, which meant it was the one place the enemy would never be looking. A ghost's path. A cold realization dawned on him. "That's a specialist's route, Major," Thorne said, his voice low. "A route for expert climbers. We don't have a mountain warfare unit attached to this FOB. Who the hell do we have that can make that climb, in the dark, in less than 3 hours?" The question hung in the air, a declaration of the plan's impossibility. The other officers nodded in agreement. The idea was clever, but they lacked the personnel. Anya Sharma looked Colonel Thorne directly in the eye. The moment stretched, thick with the weight of the ticking clock. "I can," she said. The command tent fell into a stunned silence. Thorne's eyes bored into Sharma, searching for any sign of bluff or bravado. He found none. There was only the same unnerving calm she had displayed since the moment she arrived. "You can?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You're a logistics officer." "I am a logistics officer now, sir," Sharma replied, her tone even. "But I can make that climb." The implication hung in the air. She had been something else before. Thorne was trapped. Every other option was a guaranteed failure. This plan was insane, but it was the only one that had a sliver of a chance. His career could end with this decision, but the alternative, losing that data module, was worse. He looked at the faces of his other officers, saw their doubt and fear. Then he looked at Sharma's quiet confidence. It was the only thing in the room that felt solid. "You won't go alone," he decided, his voice firming with command. "You need a second. Someone to carry comms and gear." He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Private Ortega, who was standing guard by the tent flap, trying to make himself small. He was young, light, and had a reputation for having a cool head. "Ortega," Thorne barked. "You have any climbing experience?" Ortega jumped. "A little, sir. Recreational. Rock gyms back home." "Good enough," Thorne said. "You're with the Major. Get your gear. You have 5 minutes." Ortega's face went pale, but he snapped a salute. "Yes, sir." To Sharma, Thorne said, "Major, the mission is retrieval only. Get the data module. Nothing else. Do not engage the enemy unless absolutely necessary. Your life and the privates are more valuable than the drone's chassis." "Understood, Colonel," she said. As Sharma and Ortega rushed to prepare, Thorne turned to his intelligence officer. "Get me her full file. I don't care who you have to call or what clearances you have to break. I want to know who I just sent into that gorge." Now, while Sharma and Ortega gathered their equipment, the difference between them was stark. Ortega fumbled with his gear, his hands clumsy with adrenaline. Sharma moved with a serene purpose. From her own duffel bag, the same one she'd had at the kill house, she produced a set of gear that made the base's supply sergeant's eyes go wide. It was lightweight, custom-made climbing equipment. A harness of thin but incredibly strong webbing, specialized carabiners forged from a dark, non-reflective alloy, and a length of impossibly thin, black rope. It was not standard military issue. It was the toolkit of a master. She helped Ortega secure his harness, her instructions quiet and clear, calming the young private's nerves. "Check your knots 3 times," she told him. "Trust your gear, but verify it first. Breathe slowly. The altitude will punish you if you rush." They were transported in a darkened helicopter to a drop-off point a mile from the gorge summit, the rotors beating a frantic rhythm that matched Ortega's heart. As they jumped out into the freezing night, Sharma moved like a wraith, her dark gear blending into the shadows of the rock. She paused, looking up at the sheer face of the mountain that disappeared into the starry sky. Ortega stared at it in horror. It was a wall of pure vertical granite. "Ma'am, how?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Sharma didn't answer immediately. She was checking the wind, her face turned up to the sky. Then she looked back at him, and in the faint starlight, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not a smile, but a deep, primal familiarity. She was at home here. "One handhold at a time, Private," she said. "That's how," and with that, she began to climb, disappearing into the darkness above him as if the rock itself were welcoming her back. Back at FOB Nightingale, Colonel Thorne paced his office like a caged animal. The mission was underway and he was blind. Sharma had insisted on strict comm silence to avoid detection. There would be no updates until they were back, or until they missed their return window. He felt a profound sense of helplessness. He had staked the mission 2 lives, and his command on the word of a woman he barely knew. His intelligence officer, a young lieutenant named Chun, finally burst into the office, holding a tablet. "Sir, I got it," Chun said, out of breath. "I had to call General Peterson's aide directly. He was not happy, but he authorized the release when I told him the situation." Thorne snatched the tablet. The file that loaded onto the screen was different from the one he had seen before. This one was dense with information, most of it still covered by black redaction bars. But some sections were now visible. He saw commendations for valor, citations for missions deep in enemy territory. And then he saw the entry he was looking for. Unit designation: 77th Special Tactics Group. A unit Thorne had only ever heard of in whispers. They didn't officially exist. They were the military's ghosts, tasked with impossible missions. Her specialization was listed: high-altitude infiltration and solo reconnaissance. And then he saw her call sign: Kestrel. Thorne felt a chill run down his spine. Kestrel wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. A story they told rookie intelligence officers to scare them. Kestrel was the operative they sent when a mountain was too high, a target too deep. An alpine ghost who could move through vertical terrain better than a mountain goat, striking and disappearing without a trace. The stories said Kestrel had once spent 3 weeks living on a glacier to observe an enemy compound, and had climbed the unclimbable face of Mount Janu to plant a surveillance device. The file confirmed it all. Her career had been a long series of Black Ops missions in the world's highest, most inhospitable mountain ranges. Then, the file stopped abruptly 10 years ago. A single entry, Operation Winter Sun. The details were completely redacted, but the outcome was not. Mission successful. All assets lost except Kestrel. Recommended for Distinguished Service Cross. Subsequently transferred to Logistical Command for medical and psychological reasons. Thorne finally understood. She wasn't a paper pusher. She was a warrior who had been put on a shelf, a weapon deemed too sharp, or perhaps too damaged, to be wielded anymore. They had hidden a legend in a supply depot. He looked at Chun. "Get General Peterson's aide back on the line." A moment later, a terse voice crackled from the speakerphone. "Colonel Thorne, the general is not pleased about this security breach." "My apologies," Thorne said, his voice tight. "I just have one question about Major Sharma." About Kestrel, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What about her?" "Operation Winter Sun," Thorne said. "What happened?" The aide sighed, a sound heavy with history. "She was the team leader, a high-altitude snatch and grab. They were ambushed on exfil by a force 10 times their size. She held them off alone for 7 hours on a high mountain pass so the rest of her team could get the asset out. They didn't make it. She was the only one who walked out. She carried the asset and the bodies of 2 of her team for 20 miles through a blizzard. When they found her, she had severe frostbite and hadn't slept in 4 days. The brass decided the mission had broken her. They buried her in logistics, figured it was a quiet way to let her finish her career. Thorne hung up the call, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at the holographic map, at the sheer cliff face Sharma was climbing. It wasn't a death sentence for her. It was a homecoming. Miles away, in the freezing darkness, Sharma moved with fluid grace. The rock was an old friend. Every crack, every ledge was a word in a language she knew better than English. Below her, Ortega struggled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She would secure a line, then coach him up, her voice a calm anchor in the terrifying void. Left foot higher, private. There's a solid hold just by your knee. Trust the rope. They reached the summit as the moon crested the opposing peak. Below them, nestled in the gorge, was the wreckage of the Sparrowhawk. And already, 2 trucks were approaching from the east. The enemy. They had no time. Sharma didn't hesitate. She secured the rappel line and slid down into the darkness, a phantom descending on a thread, racing against the dawn. The mess hall at FOB Nightingale was noisy, a clatter of metal trays and boisterous conversations. It was the one place on base where the rigid hierarchy relaxed, where privates and sergeants could share a table and speak with a degree of freedom. But when Colonel Thorne walked in, a hush fell over the room. He wasn't there for a meal. He moved with a singular purpose, his eyes scanning the tables. He located Major Sharma sitting alone in a corner, nursing a cup of tea. She was back in her clean uniform, looking for all the world like the logistics officer everyone had once thought she was. The only sign of the ordeal from the night before was a slight weariness in her eyes and fresh scrapes on the backs of her hands. She and Ortega had returned just before dawn, appearing out of the darkness like apparitions. She had walked straight to the command tent, placed the drone's data module on Thorne's desk without a word, and then disappeared to debrief a pale but exhilarated Private Ortega. Now, in the crowded mess hall, every eye was on the unfolding drama. Thorne walked directly to her table and stopped. Sharma looked up, her expression unreadable. She started to rise, the proper military etiquette for a subordinate when addressed by a superior officer. Thorne raised a hand, stopping her. The entire room was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the generators. Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man known for his gruff demeanor and his reluctance to give praise, stood at attention before her. Then, slowly, with a precision that seemed to freight the gesture with immense weight, he raised his hand to his brow and rendered a perfect, formal salute. It was not the casual salute a commander gives a subordinate in passing. This was the salute of a soldier acknowledging a peer. It was a salute of profound, unreserved respect. Time seemed to stop. Every soldier in that hall, from the lowest private to the most senior NCO, understood the significance of what they were witnessing. This was a public retraction of every doubt, every dismissal. It was an apology and an honor, delivered in the silent language of military tradition. Anya Sharma, seated, looked up at her commanding officer. A flicker of understanding, perhaps even gratitude, crossed her features. She gave a single, brief nod. It was enough. The acknowledgement was given and received. Thorne held the salute for a second longer, then dropped his hand, gave her another sharp nod, and turned and walked out of the mess hall. As he left, the spell was broken. A low murmur went through the room. Across the hall, Master Sergeant Gunnar Henderson was sitting with some of his men. He had watched the entire exchange, his face a mixture of awe and dawning comprehension. He finally understood that he hadn't been beaten by a logistics officer. He had been humbled by a legend. He lifted his coffee mug in Sharma's direction, a silent, personal toast. She saw the gesture and, for the first time since she had arrived at FOB Nightingale, a small, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. Private Ortega, sitting at a nearby table with his squad, felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought tears to his eyes. He had been there. He had climbed that wall with her. He had seen the quiet professional behind the myth. The major didn't need a medal or a parade. That single, silent salute from the colonel, witnessed by the entire base, was more powerful than any formal award. It was respect, earned in the dark, on a wall of rock, and finally given in the light. Life on FOB Nightingale found a new equilibrium. Major Anya Sharma was still a logistics officer. She still spent her days in the supply depot, but now she had a team of eager volunteers, led by a surprisingly deferential depot sergeant. Her organizational system was implemented across the entire depot, and the infamous 17% loss rate dropped to less than 1% within 2 weeks. The chaos was gone, replaced by her quiet, unyielding order. But her presence on the base had fundamentally changed. She was no longer an anomaly or an object of suspicion. She was an asset, a hidden weapon held in reserve. The soldiers still looked at her with awe, but the fear was gone, replaced by a deep, protective reverence. They kept their distance, not out of dismissal, but out of an understanding that she was different. They gave her space, a silent courtesy afforded to someone who had walked in worlds they could barely imagine. Colonel Thorne never spoke of the Sparrowhawk mission again, but his demeanor toward her had completely transformed. He now sought her counsel not just on logistics, but on tactical problems. He would unroll a map in his office and ask, "Major, what do you see here?" He had learned to value her unique perspective, her ability to see the unconventional path, the quiet solution that everyone else missed. Master Sergeant Henderson reopened the kill house, but his training had changed. He still yelled about speed and violence of action, but now he also spoke of efficiency, of economy of motion, of slicing the pie. He would sometimes end a session by saying, "Now that was fast." But it wasn't Kestrel fast. He never used her name, only the call sign, which had now passed into the base's shared mythology. He turned her 54-second run into a standard, a near-mythical goal for his soldiers to strive for, knowing full well none of them would ever reach it. It was no longer about his record. It was about honoring hers. Sharma herself remained unchanged. The newfound respect did not alter her routine or her personality. She was polite, professional, and reserved. She had not sought recognition, and now that she had it, she seemed to hold it lightly. She had proven her value through action, and that was all that mattered. The respect was simply a consequence, not a goal. In the final hour of a quiet evening, weeks after the drone recovery, Sharma walked to the edge of the base. The sun had set, and the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush were silhouetted against a sky of deep indigo and fading orange. The thin air was cold and clean. In her hands, she held the rope from the mission. It was not the standard-issue thick nylon rope from the base supply. It was her personal line, a thin, black cord of Dyneema, impossibly light and strong. She began to coil it. Her hands, with their network of fine scars and calluses, moved with a practiced, rhythmic grace. Each loop was perfect, falling into place without thought. The motion was a form of meditation, a physical mantra. The rope was a tool, but it was also a symbol. It was the line that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life. It had been her partner on frozen peaks and vertical rock faces. It represented her unique, dangerous, and lonely skill. It did not care about her rank, her age, or the file on a colonel's desk. It only cared about her competence. As she finished the final coil, she stood for a long moment, looking out at the mountains. They were not an enemy to be conquered or a barrier to be overcome. They were her sanctuary, the place where the complexities of the human world fell away, leaving only the simple, brutal truth of the climb. A quiet dignity settled over her features, illuminated by the rising moon. She had found her place here, not on an organizational chart, but in the silent, absolute respect she had earned. The legend of Kestrel was alive, not in a redacted file, but in the quiet competence of a major coiling her rope at the edge of the world.